you'll say, well, that, and then look at me and say, sorry. Oh, I say it. But I do it. It makes me mad.
Hey, Jared, can I get y'all to all of our eyes?
Will you take a look at it before you go in there so I can set it out?
Emailing it to everybody?
Looks great, Jeff. Looks great.
Oh, me. Wayne. One of these days, Wayne, I'll pick up on that. Somebody give me what you think is the percentage of individuals that have, if I can back up. You guys have seen it.
22%.
There you go. Percentage of people that have some type of diagnosable mental disorder. It's roughly 22%. Now, that's 1 in 5 adults. Meaning that in a congregation like Bear Valley, you've got a lot of folks in there who have been diagnosed with some type of mental disorder. Now, that's not to say that every single one of them is incapacitated. That's not to say that all of them are being medicated or that all of them are, in a safe relationship with God. That is simply 1 in 5 are having trouble regulating their brain chemistry. Now, 1 in 5. Guys, this is a topic that is real and you all need to be aware of. Ethically speaking, you need to know, what should our response be? As faithful Christians, what is it that I need to know? Basically, what is it as a preacher and a counselor do I need to be able to pass on? First question is, why does it exist? I mean, if you can imagine for just a moment what happens when somebody walks into your office and says, I've just been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Why me? And here again, I'm telling you this because this is a real-life incident. It's going to happen more and more as the baby boomers get older. We've got more and more folks who are getting Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, probably due to environmental reasons. Epicurus, Greek philosopher, he once noted, if God wishes to prevent evil but he cannot, then he's not good. If he has both the power and the will to eliminate evil, then why is evil in the world? Today we hear it described in this manner, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? The very first thing that you need to communicate to whoever this is that God didn't create mental illness. What do I mean by that?
Well, when he created the world, everything was perfect.
Everything's perfect.
It's a circumstance of sin.
It is a circumstance of sin and a circumstance of our DNA replicating. We've got over 1,600 harmful genetic mutations in our gene pool. And so you can imagine after so many replications, eventually, you're going to have some deletions, some substitutions, some replications in DNA that are going to mess things up. Some of which are resulting in some of these mental disorders. Now, I think a lot of what we're seeing is also environmental. I'll give you a real quick personal story. We had a preacher at Woodson Chapel, where my home congregation here in Nashville, he was the preacher for 15 years. He had hidden the fact for about 8 years that he had Parkinson's. And eventually it got so bad that he couldn't hide it anymore. And by that I mean he started doing the tremors, he started doing the shakes. He finally fessed up to the congregation and said, look, this is what I've got, this is what I'm dealing with. That was in about May. By November, he was having to preach sitting down. He resigned in December. When they went back to try to figure out what caused this, why did this person get this particular disorder, they're pretty sure that they tracked it down to a bad dose of vaccines that he was given as a young man. So you got a situation where he's in a rural county, they didn't refrigerate the vaccine the way they should have, he's given a dose of it. Well, 40 years later, it then shows up and manifests itself as Parkinson's disease. So This is going to be one of those things that, because of genetic mutations, because of environmental conditions, we're going to see lots and lots more of. Let's look real quickly at some of the myths. Number one, a lot of times folks believe that somebody who is suffering from mental illness will never recover enough to become a contributing member to society. In other words, they view folks who have any kind of mental disorder as basically, hey, they're gone, and we ought to put them in some kind of an institution or a house. Number two, they would say they're fundamentally unstable, unpredictable. Number three, lots of folks would say they're dangerous to those around them. Number four, they're possessed by evil spirits, demons, or curses. And number five, that they are paying the price for some kind of evil wrongdoing. Those guys are myths, and I want to make sure you understand those are myths. When somebody comes into your office and they say, hey, I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's, or I've got bipolar disorder, or I've got schizophrenia, or I've got whatever, what you need to know as a preacher, as a counselor, as a fellow human being, is that mental illness is basically, it's a term that we use to describe a whole bunch of disorders. But the bottom line is you've got a soup in your brain. And that soup has all kinds of different ingredients. And if one of those ingredients gets out of whack, the soup doesn't taste good anymore. So if you got too much salt or not enough carrots, or if you got way too much broth or not enough broth, suddenly that soup is causing problems all the way down the line. If you think of it this way, you think of it as a phone network. It is more complex than the fiber optic network you guys have got in Denver. Everything, when it's running properly, is great. All the signals get sent, everything's going good. But you can imagine what happens when either physically or chemically there is a problem, whether it be you've got neurons that are dying, whether you've got too much of a certain neurotransmitter. But if you think of it as kind of a telephone network, in certain disorders you've got certain areas of the phone lines that are dead or down. And so, the goal is to either try to repair those telephone lines or to re-network the entire grid. For instance, we know today schizophrenia is believed to be caused by too much dopamine in a system. So how do you fix that? Well, you give somebody dopamine inhibitors. You give them a drug that actually inhibits the amount of dopamine they're releasing, therefore, hopefully that person can act and function somewhat normally. Whereas bipolar disorder, lots and lots of folks in the church today suffering from bipolar disorder. American Journal of Psychiatry reported in those with bipolar disorder, two major areas of the brain contain 30% more cells that send signals to other brain cells. Extra signaling may lead to a kind of overstimulation. Basically, this would be a case of too many phone lines in one part of the country, and thus a dramatic increase in phone activity causing problems all across the nation. So there are some people that instead of having phone lines down, they just got too many phone lines, and they're all trying to make calls at the same time, and it causes some serious problems. Messages of the brain are carried by neurons. When these cells function properly, everything's okay. When they don't, you got brain chemistry that is altered. Now, obvious question. What causes mental illnesses? You got lots and lots of possibilities. Obviously, if somebody experiences trauma to the brain, that can cause something that can be life, go on literally throughout their life. You've got inheritance, genetics. We know some of these disorders that we're talking about, there is a genetic component that can be passed down from generation after generation. We've got infections that can actually cause neurological disorders. Believe it or not, stress is one of the biggest triggers. Nutrition, if you're not feeding the brain properly, it's just like any other part of the body. If it doesn't get what it needs, then it's going to suffer. Drug alcohol abuse is an obvious one. In fact, I don't know how much they give you all on the topic of drugs and alcohol there at the school, but methamphetamine is one of the most dangerous substances when it comes to your brain that you can come in contact with. It is literally a toxic poison that will absolutely eat away at your neurons. Somebody tell me what is the number one way that we treat mentally ill?
Drugs.
Drugs. What we try to do is we try to build the soup back, so to speak. So in other words, let's say somebody's got too much dopamine. Well, we try to either inhibit dopamine or we add other ingredients like serotonin. We try to balance it out. What's the problem with that, guys? What is the problem with trying to treat somebody that is mentally ill?
Side effects.
Okay, side effects is a big, huge one.
If they stop taking their pills and they go back and then they forget to take their pills.
Okay, they forget to take their pills. Let's go back to my soup analogy for just a minute. Let's say that you're making a soup and you feel like it doesn't have enough carrots in it, so you start adding carrots. And all of a sudden you look in the pot and you realize you've added too many carrots. So then you've got to either try to get rid of the carrots, or you got to add more broth, or more chicken, or more noodles, or more whatever. When you think of it as a soup, and keeping in mind the brain is always trying to regulate itself, if you add something into that soup, it's going to try to counterbalance everything. And so it is a very, very fine balancing act trying to get the brain chemistry just right. Some of the drugs, you guys probably have heard of most of these or some of these. Obviously, things like Valium is a sedative. You've got Librium, which is something that will relax you. Basically, it's an anti-anxiety drug. Thorazine reduces hallucinations. Haldol is a thought disorder agitation drug. Basically, all of these are going to calm you down. But in calming you down, it also is then affecting other parts of your brain. Somebody mentioned the side effects. The side effects of most of these drugs are pretty bad, ranging anywhere from massive weight gain, impotency. Basically, you name it, it runs the gauntlet. Sometimes you're taking a drug to calm you down and it may cause hallucinations. Sometimes you're taking a drug to get rid of those hallucinations and it puts you to sleep. Somebody else mentioned the fact that they forget to take the medication. And here's what in my personal experience, what I see. And that is, you get a situation where somebody is basically they are diagnosed with a mental illness, and doctor says, "Here, I want you to take these particular drugs." Say, "Okay, no problem." They take the drugs, they feel great. So what do?
Abuse them.
They stop taking the drugs. Because they feel good. They say, "I don't need this." And then they go back down the bottom of the hill until they are maybe suicidal, or maybe they are depressed all the time, or maybe they're manic. And they realize, "Oh, wow, I need these drugs." So they take the drugs again and they go back up the hill. They feel great. And 3 weeks later they decide, "I don't need drugs. I feel great." And so it's this constant roller coaster battle where they're going up and down these hills because basically they don't realize I need a steady supply in my bloodstream in order to maintain a normal walk of life. Now, here's the bottom line question that we need to address today. You guys are a preacher. somebody comes in your office, what is the condition of a faithful Christian who contracts a mental illness?
The condition they are in before they contract the mental illness.
Okay?
Well, it depends on if they can judge right and wrong anymore.
And what do you mean?
Because if they lose their judgment, then I don't believe they can sin without knowing that. If they don't know what they're doing, then they can't. I don't believe that they can sin, and then that would be their state before they contracted the mental illness. But if they can still, like, if they just get depression or something like that, where they can still kind of judge, whether or not they're sinning, whether or not their actions are going against God's will, then they're still, they've still got to keep the right relationship with God.
Okay, absolutely. What I want us to do, I'm going to put a slide up here that I hope you guys will somewhat memorize, and not necessarily just for a test, guys. I want you to memorize this one primarily for yourselves. This is something that I put together to show folks basically kind of the pattern. And in order to read it, everybody's got to start in the top left-hand corner that I've labeled Kingdom of Nature. All human beings start out in that box, period. Everybody starts there. Notice I put on there, you're not saved, but you are safe. Would we agree that children are not saved, but rather they are safe in the eyes of God?
Yes.
Okay. You'll notice there are two arrows coming off of that box. You've got one that says Eternal Kingdom, top right. That would be the pathway of somebody that dies at a very young age before they become aware of what sin really is. So there are some people that go from being in this safe position who are then safe in the arms of God. But you'll notice there's a down arrow that talks about the kingdom of Satan. That's the path of the majority of people. Meaning at some point in your life, you leave that safe status, and suddenly you're aware of sin, you commit sin, and you are in that box. Now, from that particular box, you can go to two places. You can either go to, you notice at the very bottom, eternal punishment. That would be the way of the majority of people on the planet. That is, the vast majority of people on this planet are living in a state of sin. They've never been washed by the blood of Jesus Christ. Therefore, they are lost, and if they die that way, they're going to be lost eternally. But you'll also notice an arrow that actually goes through the cross. I did that on purpose just to kind of show coming in contact with the blood of Christ. You are now in the kingdom of Christ. Now this is where it gets a little tricky. The bottom right-hand corner that says Kingdom of Christ actually has three arrows in it. You've got an arrow back to the kingdom of Satan. What would that represent? Yeah, somebody that falls away. Somebody that knows the truth but then returns back to sin. You've got a line straight up that goes into eternal kingdom. That would be for what?
Those who die faithful.
Those who die faithfully. Then you notice a dotted line that goes right through the middle of the cross to that back to that kingdom of nature. What do you think that signifies?
Those who were in Christ but then lost the ability to judge.
Absolutely. That would be what I would put the mentally ill, those who are unable to adequately judge right and wrong anymore. Now, I'm gonna get rid of that. If you guys want to copy it down, you can, but I wanna be able to actually see your faces. Now, I started out this lesson by saying 1 in 5 people are diagnosed with a mental disorder. What do you think the majority of people, if I said that from the pulpit and then showed a slide like this, what do you think a lot of people are going to take away from that I don't want them taking away from that?
I'm just fine. I don't have to worry about my salvation anymore. I've got depression, I'm good.
1 in 5 people? It's safe. They're good. As long as I've got a diagnosis labeled on me, man, I'm safe. I'm okay. And guys, let's be honest. the medical profession today loves to give labels. They love to give diagnosis. And so you got all these folks at home who are sitting there going, I got depression, or I've got bipolar disorder, or I've got restless leg syndrome, or I've got hangnail, or whatever. So they're thinking, I'm okay, I'm safe. What is the one qualifying thing, though, that we've got to understand in looking at this?
Accountability.
You have to lose the ability to understand and recognize true accountability. And a lot of the disorders that are out there, guys, that's not the case. A man who is suffering from a mild case of depression, or, believe it or not, even in the initial stages, even in the first few stages of Parkinson's, folks are still mentally with it enough to know right from wrong. They know certain actions are right, certain actions are wrong. So it's not like we as preachers are standing up in front of folks saying, okay, if you got something, you got a free pass, you got a one-way ticket to heaven. That's not the case. What I'm discussing is those cases where that couple comes to you and they say, we've got a Down syndrome child. And this child wants to be baptized. And that child is smiling, and you smile right back at that child and you say, you are safe in the arms of God. Darling, you don't need to do that. If you want to do that simply for your benefit, we can go through the motions. But you look those parents in the eye and you show them this chart and you say, your daughter is safe in the arms of God. She doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. And so what we would be doing up there basically would be getting her wet.
Aren't there degrees,
Questions?
though?
Absolutely there are.
Within Down syndrome,
Absolutely.
not every Down syndrome child is incapable of delineating between right and wrong.
I mean, there's I was going to say a friend of mine. I just know him by name and through seeing him quite often at a grocery store that I go to on the way home from the office on a fairly regular basis. I see him quite often. He and I chat a little bit. He's got Down syndrome. There's no doubt in my mind he has it, but he has a very mild case of it and is able to actually work in that particular grocery store. And so in a situation like that where you've got somebody who is functioning on their own, who's able to hold down a job and able to know right from wrong, is teachable, then obviously I would never turn away somebody like that. But when you've got somebody who basically can't spell their name, who doesn't know right from wrong, who doesn't know anything except maybe saying dada or drooling or whatever, that particular person is not in a sinful state anyway. Yes, Dean.
So an 18-year-old who has not been baptized for the forgiveness of their sins and then contracts, I don't know, a mental illness that causes them to be incoherent, they're just out of luck.
What you just described, Dean, is probably, in my estimation, is the hardest of all of the mental illness ethical dilemmas to solve. And I'll go ahead and tell you guys, I don't have the answer for this one. Thankfully, I'm not a judge. I've got an opinion about it, but, I obviously don't have the answer. My opinion about it is, if that person has been given the opportunity to learn the truth and they have disregarded it, and a year or two later they contract some kind of disorder, they're going to be held accountable for that. If that person grows up and is not exposed to the truth, and I think that's where God's judgment, God's grace is going to come in, and thankfully He is a judge and I'm not. It's the same thing with, all right, let's flip the coin. This one's easier to me. What if you got somebody who's 59 years old and suddenly that person contracts, they're not a Christian, they contract bipolar disorder. What do you say there?
We're going to be accountable, probably.
Do you lose your judgment with bipolar disorder?
It's severe.
Well,
If it's severe enough, yeah.
it wouldn't change from what you said. I mean, they could be 59 years old and never had anybody introduce the gospel to them. We don't know if they have or they haven't.
Okay?
Just because
Let's say they're an American. Dustin, let's say they're an American.
that's fine.
Okay?
It doesn't change. I mean, I know people that have never truly. I mean, yeah, they heard of God, and they believed in God all their life, but they have never been raised in a family to have any of that brought to them, or anybody, or let me just say it, we've been doing a bad job to get to them. And
Okay.
I mean, what I'm saying is we got to make sure we don't assume that just because they're old, they've heard the gospel.
All right, we're going to take a very short rabbit trail, just because I think this is important. Would a innocent Aborigine out in the bushland be sentenced to hell by God, who's never heard the gospel?
Yes. The proverbial man on the island, right?
He's accountable.
Okay. How many of you say yes?
How
How many of you say no? All right. I don't know if you missed the question because I said, would an innocent man? How many innocent people do you know of that have ever walked this earth? One. Okay. So now let's talk about the sinful bushman in Africa. What do we know about sin?
Separates man from God.
Separates man from God. Now, let me remind Dustin and everybody else in that class of something. Do you realize there was 4,000 years of history where there was no man called Jesus Christ? And God still expected them to worship him. And he punished them not because they hadn't followed Jesus Christ, but because they hadn't worshiped and devoted themselves to him. So even if somebody on an island has never heard the gospel of Jesus Christ, I know from Romans chapter 1, verse 20, that they can look around and the invisible attributes of God are clearly seen, so that they are without excuse. So no matter where you are on the planet, you can look around and say, you know what, this couldn't have gotten here. I'm going to worship God.
I can't agree with you. Sorry. I can't.
Well,
you're going to have to agree to disagree, because the fact of the matter is that he can see God everywhere. You can understand that because you know who God is. But this person on this island, who's all by themselves, however they got there, they've never heard of God. They don't even know who God is. But they know all this stuff is living there.
Read Romans chapter 1, verse 20 for me, please.
I understand what that says,
But it's inspired.
Oh. 1 verse 20.
Yeah.
It says, "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse."
What's Paul just saying right there?
Yeah.
He is saying, look, folks, since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes have been seen. And then he tops it off by saying, you're without excuse. KJ.
Weren't even the Gentiles required to worship through the patriarch system, even though they weren't under the
Absolutely.
law?
Absolutely they were.
Jews. So that, I mean, they didn't have any excuse either for not worshiping.
Dustin, let me do this to you. Let me share this with you, because I want to make sure you understand where I personally am.
Okay, then
I don't like saying what I'm saying.
Right. No,
Because it puts a lot of my extended family members in a horrible situation.
Right.
And it also makes me realize there's a lot of people on this planet right now that are going to hell because they're not ever going to get the gospel mouth to mouth from one of us. And that hurts my heart deeply, more than you know. My wife will tell you, anytime somebody dies these days, I'm grieving thinking, man, I wish I'd have got to them. But I can't change the fact that that is the truth. And since it's in an inspired book, and he's saying, look, here's the truth, I know that if somebody, I also know the Bible says, if somebody is searching, they will find, meaning through God's providence or however, he is going to make it available for that person.
Okay, and I agree 100% with everything you said.
Okay.
And I do believe that, obviously, the Bible is inspired. Don't get me wrong there.
Very good.
But,
Very good.
But talking about people who live in a populated area of, say, of the United States or anywhere, the notion of God and the Bible is floating around. You're talking about a person who's living on an island by themselves, never had any kind of contact with any kind of man, doesn't even know a language, because if he's truly been by himself this whole time, he wouldn't even need to speak.
Okay.
The word of God. Now he
You
might
just described-
understand that. You see what I'm
You
saying?
just described Adam, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. But God also talked to Adam. Now maybe God will talk to this random person on this island. We don't know that.
Okay?
Okay? But I can't even understand how this person would be judged. You see what I'm saying? I don't understand. I understand obviously there's a difference between the United States and a person living in a populated area and a person by themselves on an island. How would that person ever get the word?
Justin, let's boil it down to what I call simple mathematics. Dustin.
Okay, thank you.
I said Dustin, didn't
I thought you said Justin.
Justin, whatever. Let's boil it down to what I call simple mathematics. All men except Christ have sinned.
Okay.
God is holy and cannot have anything to do with sin.
Right.
Therefore, sinful man will not be around God. That's it. That's the equation.
Right.
The only thing that can bridge that gap is the blood of Jesus Christ. Now, thankfully, there's 4,000 years of history before the blood of Jesus Christ where they didn't know that and the blood actually flows backwards. But the point being, you got a man on an island, you got a man on the bushland of Africa, you got a man wherever. If he does not acknowledge the fact that God is the supreme being and come to a knowledge of the truth, then he is dying in a sinful state.
I know, and that's incredible.
It is incredible. You know why that's incredible? It's incredible that we aren't getting out preaching and teaching more. That's why it's incredible. That's why what you're doing in this school is so important. Because there's somebody out there right now walking around waiting for Dustin to knock on their door and say, let me tell you about something that's changed my life. That's why it's important. Dean.
Oh, I was just going to say 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 7 through really 10 kind of clears the whole matter up. And where God says in 7, and to give relief to those who are afflicted, and to us as well when the Lord Jesus will be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, dealing out retribution to those who do not know God, and to those who do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. These will pay the penalty of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. So, I mean, that kind of answers the question about, the guy on the island.
All right, any questions on that before we move on? Because obviously I know.
I want you to also understand, Brad, that I'm not trying to, go against what the Bible says. I mean, that by any means. I'm just trying to understand it because, man, I hope I never get asked that question. I mean, I hope I'm prepared. I guess I should say. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope we're all prepared. And guys, it is a situation where this one topic, it's very heated, obviously. Even in the Brotherhood, there are folks who are saying, well, surely God wouldn't do that to that person. But then you've got God being a respecter of persons. He's basically giving certain people one code of judgment and holding other people to a different standard. And we know God doesn't do that. Thankfully, He is a just and a merciful God. And because this is such a serious topic, it brings to life the fact that, we're walking around every day with a bunch of dead people around us. And by that, I mean, when you go into a restaurant in Denver, Colorado, when you stop and think about the fact that that person right there is probably heading to hell unless I or someone reaches out to them.
Yeah.
Then it gets real. Chris?
Well, and if any of us who have not been asked that question eventually will be, because I've been asked several times by people, you mean my dead relative is in heaven, or you mean that, what do you mean my uncle who's such a great guy who did all these great things and volunteered
Right.
at kitchens and stuff, that he isn't in heaven?
Right.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
And let me tell you guys, if you compromise in that moment, if you say, well, maybe they're okay, maybe everything's good, the foundation you just laid with that person is garbage. They definitely deserve the truth. One of the strongest lessons you'll ever preach, if you've never preached the 3 calls of evangelism, you guys know what lesson I'm talking about? The call from down under, the call from within, the call from without. Say yes, Brad. We know what you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay. That particular lesson is very, very, very powerful in that you're showing folks, look, when the rich man and Lazarus went down there, he's saying, look, go get my brothers. Tell them what's going on because I don't want them in this place. And, it's the same thing. You've got folks who are going to be saying, look, if I believe this, what is that saying about my Uncle Joe or my grandparents or my whatever? And you need to make sure they understand right now, your Uncle Joe and your grandmother, they want you to come to a knowledge of the truth. And they're not going to be with you kneeling on the day of judgment. You've got to kneel by yourself in front of God. You've got to answer for yourself.
And that's a better way to say it than to say, well, yeah, your uncle's in hell.
All right. Absolutely. Right now, he's crispy fried. KJ.
Oh. I was just going to say,
And scene.
this just stresses the importance of the Great Commission because they would actually be better off if they were saved, if they didn't know God, they would be better off not knowing God because Christianity is not easy. And
Absolutely.
it'd be a lot easier to not know God, and if they're going to be saved anyway, so that would negate bringing them the gospel because they're better off without it. So
Does the Bible not indicate that, by the way?
I'm sure it does.
Yes.
Absolutely. Anthony, you got a point?
Go ahead. Sorry.
I thought I saw Anthony's hand. I'm sorry.
I believe John did.
So everybody,
John, yes, sir.
all of us as preachers need to view people around us that we don't know as being on a stranded island all by themselves.
Very good point.
So now
Very,
going
very
back to the point of the man that was 59 years old and contracted a mental illness.
Yes.
Now, obviously, he's past the point of being able to understand what you teach him about the gospel, so what do you do?
Yes. Okay, 59 years of age, he's had 59 years to come to a knowledge of the truth. It
Now
would be
it's
like
time to run
basic.
out.
It's basically like if somebody died at 59. And that is tragic, and that is horrible, and that is absolutely gut-wrenching if you really think about it.
It happens.
But the fact of the matter is, this guy, if he lived in America, and that's why I threw Dustin, that's why, now you got me saying Justin, that's why I threw out the United States qualifier. Because you cannot live in this country and not at least know there's a controversy about being named God. Now, you may get away with that in parts of Africa. You may get away with that in parts of of South America. In this nation, it is so hotly debated and contested in court systems and all that. I don't ever buy the fact of anybody in America saying, well, I didn't know about this guy. That's garbage. That's total garbage. Now, you may not know what the Bible says, and you may choose not to want to know God, but whether or not you knew him or not, that's a totally different argument.
So can you give us scripture so we can show the family? Because, man, what if somebody comes to you and says, my dad, he's never obeyed the gospel, but he needs to hear it, he needs to be baptized because, what are you going to tell him? Oh, sorry, he's hopeless. I mean, obviously that's not going to work. We're going to have to study with them and let them understand. So do you have some kind of scripture that we can write down?
How about that right there?
Yeah, and I'm going to have to get that off your website because I cannot see it. So
Okay, that's fine.
I'll get that off your deal.
But maybe what we can do is pray for advancements in science to where he can come back from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's what we would want. Somebody, let me, hold on just a second. Let me put it back up. There we go. Any questions on this slide before we move to the next one? Any comments, questions as far as, hey, I don't agree with that, or why didn't you do this, or?
I got kind of one.
Okay.
On the chart there, you've got the arrow going from. Is that an arrow going from the kingdom of Christ back to the kingdom of nature, or the kingdom of nature going to the kingdom of Christ?
You got a dotted line going from the kingdom of Christ up back to the kingdom of nature.
Okay, so it's not it's not going from the kingdom of nature to the kingdom of Christ.
No.
Okay.
No.
That must okay. It looked kind of different in the way that.
Why do you think that is? Why would I not have an arrow going from nature to Christ?
Because you don't need to be.
You have to go through the
You don't
cross.
need to be in the kingdom of Christ unless you've been in the kingdom of Satan. All of Satan.
That's right. Yeah. Chuck, you have a comment?
Yeah, we looked at Romans 1:20, but I think 19 is probably just as important, if not more. It says because that.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Because that which is known about God is evident within them, the unrighteous, for God made it evident to them. So it's more of a denial more than not knowing, because they know at some point, and then they have to deny that there is a God.
Absolutely. And you know what's funny is, deep down, I really honestly think that men like Richard Dawkins, men like Bertrand Russell, men like Christopher Hitchens, deep down, I believe in my heart of hearts, they know there has to be something out there, but they have purposefully chosen to live their lives in such a way that they don't want to bow down to that, they don't want to embrace that, they don't want to answer to it, they don't want to be in subjection to it, and therefore they have made a purposeful decision to push away or rebel against it. Let's see. What should our response be to mental illness? What do you guys think?
Are you talking about the Christian who contracts mental illness, or are you talking about what should his response be to his condition, or are you talking about what should our position or our response be to this?
I guess I'm saying, knowing what we're talking about. Let's start out as just preachers, and then we'll go to just being a general Christian. What should our response be to individuals that have some kind of disorder that show up in our congregation or who are members in our congregation? What do we do?
Try to get a better understanding of their situation and try to have some compassion towards what they might be going through. Because, as you said, there's so many different types of mental illness. A lot of emotion comes along with it. And if they're acting out in adverse way, if we're aware of their mental situation, then we can have some sympathy towards that.
Okay. What else? Good point.
I think we also have to look at how they interact with one another with others in the congregation, because I know at Miller Street there was a guy who was recently baptized with the mental illness, but he can go around and shake people's hands and actually get to know them. So I think it also depends on how people interact with one another.
Okay.
And ensure that they've been actually properly diagnosed. Because isn't there a big problem with people being misdiagnosed with things like bipolar disorder?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's basically, that's an umbrella diagnosis. That's one of those where it's like, okay, if you got a bunch of crazy stuff going on and we're not really sure what it is, we're just going to throw this label on you because that's an easy one that can cover a lot of different things. Let me put this slide up there because, to me, I threw down some things that we can do. Number one, first and foremost, stop avoiding people. Because if you sit back and you watch in a church setting or in any setting, whether it's the mall, whatever, if somebody has any kind of a disorder, people will purposefully gravitate away from them. And guys, that's not what Jesus did. I mean, you think about who he went after. Most of the time, he was going after the sick. Number two, educate yourself and your family. Use this as a learning opportunity. There's a congregation in Alabama who's got somebody who is a member there who has got a very unique disorder, and instead of the congregation acting crazy and people kind of avoiding this person, they did the opposite. They literally immersed the congregation, brought them all up to speed on what it was so that folks could, you know, help out, reach out, know what's going on, that kind of thing. I'll say this as a funny, just because you guys, this is a preaching class. You know, I've been in basically all kind of situations preaching. And I was in a seminar environment one time, was preaching, and I heard somebody yell at me right in the middle of my lesson. I'm kind of going, what, you know, what's going on? But nobody else in the congregation looked over. And so, you know, at first I'm kind of thinking, okay, maybe I'm losing my mind. I don't know what's going on. Well, about 5 minutes later, this person yelled again. So by now I'm kind of getting mad. I'm thinking, dude, what, you know, wait your turn. I'll open it up for questions later. Yells again. And, you know, at this time, this person's yelling. I'm looking around at everybody kind of going, hello, do you hear this guy? Somebody going to take him out? Ended up, the guy had Tourette's. And they forgot to tell me that. Now, they did tell me afterwards. But, you know, the point being, if you think about it, that's one of those things, if you educate the congregation on what that is, it makes it a whole lot easier in the long run as far as, you know, how to react. Number 3, seek ways to use the talents of those suffering from mental illness. Somebody mentioned just now about Miller Street, being able to welcome people. Use them however you can. One of the things I think all human beings value is this idea of being needed, being valued. And folks with mental illness are not different in that aspect. They want to feel a part of the family. Yes, sir.
Well, with that individual Chuck was talking about, well, we have 2 individuals. I'm not sure if this is the one he was talking about, but we have a Down syndrome man, and he's the kindest person you'll ever want to meet. So we have him welcoming, we have him passing out the bulletins, and everyone wants to see him, and he wants to see everyone else. And whenever he's gone, the entire church knows it, and he feels very much a part. So you can definitely use him.
That is awesome. That is very awesome. Guys, you will not find a kinder heart in many cases than somebody who is stricken with some of these disorders, especially Down syndrome, because in many ways they have the innocence and the heart of a child. And it's kind of that reminder of why Jesus said, hey, you know, let the children come unto me. He's wanting us to have that same innocence, that same true love for humanity that some of these folks have. Number 4, remember the mentally ill and their families in your prayers, both public and in private. Because there again, guys, if you are praying from the pulpit and you mention this, it breaks down some of the stereotypes and the walls that we've built up. Number 5, help them find competent help. This goes back to what Anthony was just saying. There are some times where they are misdiagnosed. And as a counselor, as a preacher, as a friend, as a Christian, if you feel like, hey, this person realistically is not getting what they need, then you owe it to help them out. For instance, I had a lady that I was counseling with who had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She was not bipolar. She had some other things going on, but her doctor basically had drugged her out enough to where she was almost in kind of a, I don't want to say a comatose state, but she was getting pretty close to it. He had just literally numbed her out to where he wouldn't have to deal with her. Well, that's not good. Does it work? Does it keep her from committing suicide or keep her from having highs and lows? Absolutely. But is that any kind of a life for a person who has 2 children? Number 6, monitor their behavior. Because as I mentioned, there are a lot of these people who will purposefully take themselves off medication or they forget their medication. And it may be that you can help in some way when you see them starting down a hill, so to speak. And then last, be patient, long-suffering as they try to regain their normal brain chemistry. I'm going to show you this cartoon just because I want to make sure you never, ever, ever do this. You got a preacher who's saying, we all know mental illness is a result of a lack of faith or sins committed by that person. Guys, that is terribly, terribly, terribly wrong. Don't ever, ever say that. Make sure that you understand God. I mean, we know just from the book of Job that what is going on in our life is not brought about by sin. We know from the book of Luke when Jesus was talking about the people who the Tower of Siloam fell on, they weren't killed because of something they did. Questions or comments before we leave this particular topic? Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
Just to go back to what you talked about the person yelling out.
Yes.
During your what if just because I've heard this, what if that person is yelling out obscenities?
Yes, that has happened actually.
Yeah. How do you address that? And especially if it's somebody that you're trying to take in, or maybe it's a person who just recently contracted a mental illness and they weren't right with God before they contracted it, and they're really not savable. Technically, they're dead in God's eyes unless they get better. Obviously, you don't want to burn your bridges in case they do get better. But
right.
How do you handle that and deal with the family?
Okay, let's start with taking on somebody who is a Christian who contracts Tourette syndrome. So you got a situation where somebody has been baptized, they are saved, they get a disorder, and they start, for whatever reason, hollering out obscenities.
Right.
Believe it or not, in many cases of Tourette syndrome, they're saying obscenities because their mind is sitting there saying, I know I'm about to say something, please don't let it be an obscenity. It's kind of a reverse kind of deal. It's like the brain is sitting there saying, please don't let me, please don't let me, please don't let me, blank.
Right.
And it's kind of like they're losing that internal fight. Well, obviously, if that is a situation, you cannot hold them accountable to that. If I'm the preacher in that situation, or if I'm a visiting preacher, in my estimation, that's where good elders have to come in. And they have to make the decision what to do. If it were me personally, I would probably talk to that person on a good day in the office and say, hey, we both know this is going on. How do you feel about it? And get, more than likely that person is going to say, I feel horrible, don't want it to happen. That's why those are the words that I don't want to say, and so that's why they're coming out. I've seen situations where individuals in that particular situation are very faithful, helpful members, and they actually worship in what you and I might call a cry room.
Okay.
So that they are still a part of the family, but they're in a special room for folks who disrupt worship.
Right.
Because, as an elder, you do have to think about the fact that can be disruptive to people's worship.
Right.
Furthermore, you got little ears that are hearing some words that are not good. And so you do have to address it.
Okay, now what about the other scenario with a non-Christian who contracted it, and now the family's bringing that person to church, and they're doing it?
Okay, you got a non-Christian who's got Tourette's. First thing you got to worry about first and foremost, throw out the Tourette's. That's a medical, physical condition. You got to get their soul right first. So if I'm the preacher, I'm studying in that person's home, in my home, in the office, somewhere to bring them to a knowledge of the truth. I would also meet with as many people in the congregation and let them know, look, here's the situation. We're on top of it. We know what's going on. We're not just allowing somebody to come in here and curse freely. Once that person's soul is saved, then you have the opportunity to look at them and say, hey, you've been coming here. We're excited to have you. We want you to do everything. Given the language that you're saying, what do you think would be the best option? And allow them to kind of think about it and see if they come to the same, a good conclusion of, hey, maybe I can be a counter. I can count heads and watch the parking lot, or maybe I can be in the cry room, or maybe I can do whatever.
Right. Okay.
But the medical condition pales to the soul condition. You got to worry about the soul first.
Right, and I didn't, just because I don't know about Tourette's, but I didn't know they were savable if they had Tourette's. I didn't know if they were able to comprehend.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And in fact, most people with Tourette's these days can control it with medication.
Okay.
Thankfully, that's one that has been knocked out pretty well. Any other thoughts specifically on mental illness, whether it be bipolar, schizophrenia, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, anything like that before we move on? Because it's one of those topics we do not discuss much in the church, and I did not want to be teaching an ethics class and at least not mention, not at least touch on it. All right, let's progress on then. In your syllabus, you'll notice that today we're talking a little bit about the topic of morals, and I want us to talk about how we got here. This is a quote from John Dunphy. He says, "I am convinced that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as proselyters of a new faith. Their teachers must embody the same selfless dedication of the most rabid fundamentalist preacher, or they'll be ministers of another sort, utilizing a classroom instead of a pulpit to convey humanist values in whatever subject they teach, regardless of the educational level, preschool, daycare, or large state university." We're going to spend a few minutes talking about the difference between biblical ethics and secular humanist ethics. Because I think and I'm going to show you some examples, but I think we all know our society, our world has really adopted the morality, the ethics of secular humanism. Now, the question becomes, all right, where did they get it from? What is that? What does it mean? When Brad says humanism, what should I be getting ready for a test? Well, first and foremost, you need to kind of familiarize yourself with their document. The Humanist Manifesto is kind of like the Bible for humanists. I'm going to show you 4 of the fundamental planks of the Humanist Manifesto. Understand, I pretty much copied these word for word. These are basically the articles of founding articles in their manifesto. The very first plank says religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. You'll notice in the pyramid, I put my own summary of what that means. And my summary would be, okay, that means there is no God. The second plank. Humanism believes that man is a part of nature, that he has emerged as a result of a continuous process. Translation, man is a product of evolution. Now again, guys, as you're typing this, as you're thinking about this, bear in mind the Humanist Manifesto is now the backbone for many of our textbooks. Number 3, holding an organic view of life. Humanists find that the traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected. You say, okay, what are you talking about, this traditional dualism of mind and body? For the longest time, man believed that there was both a mind and a body, or a soul and a body. Humanists are saying we got to reject this. Basically, there's only one, and it's just your brain. That's all you got. You are just a bag of neurons firing in your head, and that you don't have a soul. Plank number 4. Humanism recognizes that man's religious culture and civilization, as clearly depicted by anthropology and history, are the product of a general development due to his interaction with his natural environment and his social heritage. Now again, guys, if you look on the pyramid, I've summarized this by simply saying religion is a product of evolution. Because that's basically what they're saying. Our religious culture is a product of gradual development. And then finally, I skipped on to the 8th plank. The 8th plank says this. Religious humanism considers the complete realization of human personality to be the end of man's life and to seek its fulfillment and development in the here and now. Again, this one I labeled simply eat, drink, and be merry. Because think about it for just a moment, guys. There is no, according to this document, there is no God. There is no soul. Man's the product of evolution. Religion is the product of evolution. So basically what you need to do is live for the here and now. And sadly, that's what many, many, many young people today are doing. And that's what their textbooks are promoting. They don't use these exact words, but they are definitely promoting an attitude of gratify yourself, instant gratification, materialism, and don't worry about the consequences. All right, why does this matter? Look on page 174 of your textbook. If you got the same edition that I've got, it's going to be on 174. You may not be. Page 174, Norman Geisler, he gives a chart, a table, where he is basically evaluating the differences between a Judeo-Christian worldview and a secular humanist worldview. So with Judeo-Christians, we believe there's a creator. Obviously with secular humanists, they say there is no creator. With the Judeo-Christian worldview, we would say that man was specially created. Secular humanists say that man evolved from animals. Number 3, Judeo-Christians would say that God is sovereign over life. Secular humanists would prove that, or would say that man is sovereign over life. Number 4, they would say that there is a sanctity of life principle if you are a Christian, whereas secular humanists worry about the quality of life principle. That quality of life thing ring a bell to you? Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier. When somebody comes in and says, hey, look, my uncle, he's on tubes, and I think I'm going to pull the plug. Or my baby doesn't really, the doctors told me he's not going to have a quality of life. last but not least, the end, according to Christians, the end does not justify the mean, and yet secular humanists would say the end does justify the mean. As you're looking through those lists, I want you to be thinking about what our society does in regards to each one of these. And in fact, if you guys haven't read this chapter that we're in right now, you best get reading it, because he's got some pretty good stuff in here where he's basically saying, look, this is what is being taught on a day-by-day level. And if you form your ethics around a secular humanist worldview, then think about what conclusions you're going to be coming to. For instance, January 1st, 2008, California Bill SB 7, this would be for Dustin, by the way. California Bill SB 777 was passed, giving special protection to homosexuals, transgendered individuals, was intended to limit discrimination, but now plays into school textbooks. Words like mother and father, used to represent the family, are now against the law. Literally, you can't use those words in a California textbook. The reason being, they say that that doesn't represent what they think family should be. Because family could be 2 moms or 3 dads or whatever. Maybe a mom and a goat, or a dad and a sheep, or whatever.
No, that makes you sick. That was Tuesday.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm mixing the cow and
Yeah.
All right, now let's look at another little case deal. 13-year-old boy in Washington State was removed from his parents after he complained to school counselors that his parents took him to church too much. School counselor encouraged him to call Child Protective Services with his complaint. His call led to the subsequent removal and placement in foster care. It was only after his parents agreed to the judge's requirement of less frequent church attendance that they were able to get their son back.
That says Washington. That's not even in California.
That's not even in California.
Wow.
We go back to Washington.
Yeah, was that right?
Early 1980s, a landmark parental rights case reached the Washington State Supreme Court. The case involved a 13-year-old girl named Sheila Marie Sumi, whose parents were alarmed when they found evidence of their daughter's participation in drug activity and escalating sexual involvement. Their response was to act immediately to cut off negative influences in their daughter's life by grounding her. Now, the girl's lucky she ain't my daughter, because grounding would have been the start. That'd have been a whole lot more. But Sheila goes to her high school counselor. She complains about her parents' actions. She was advised that she could be liberated from her parents because there was a conflict between parent and child. She notified Child Protective Services about her situation, subsequently removed from her home, placed in foster care. Her parents, desperate to get their daughter back, challenged the action of social workers. The state law nevertheless gave Child Protective Services authority to split apart the Sumi family and take Sheila away. And in fact, she stayed away, guys, for several years. Now, I say all of that to say this. The 2 cases that I just gave you from Washington State, the boy who says I go to church too much, and the girl who was doing drugs and having sex, both of those were based around Washington law that was basically a trial law in that state that we are now looking at adopting all over the United States of America. There is a UN treaty that is actually being put forth right now as we speak. It's called the UN Conventions on Rights of a Child. And basically what this law is going to do, actually it's a treaty, it's higher than a law. What this treaty is going to do is give children rights basically over their parents. So for instance, good parents would no longer be entitled to legal presumption that they act in the best interest of their children. Instead, the government would have the authority to overrule any and all parents' decisions. Number 2, parents can no longer spank their children even in the home. Period. It's against the law. Number 3, Children would have the legal right to choose their own religion. Parents would be permitted to give only advice. Number 4, children would acquire a legally enforceable right to leisure.
What does that mean?
That means back when I was little and my dad said, Brad, go get the lawnmower. Had I looked at him and said, Dad, you know, I've got the legal right to leisure, he would have kicked me from one end of the room to the next. Next one, Christian schools that refuse to teach alternative worldviews and teach that Christianity is the only true religion would violate Article 29 of the treaty. Next, allowing parents to opt out of their children out of sex education would be out of compliance with the UNCRC. And finally, children would have the right to reproductive health information services and abortions without parental knowledge or consent.
I'm sure this is going to fly real well in Saudi Arabia, right?
They've already passed it. In fact, there's only 2 nations that have not signed off on this. Only the United States of America and Somalia.
Wow.
Everybody else has signed. Every other nation in the world has signed that.
Every other nation has signed it.
Iran.
Murder age 17, 11 months, 29 days at the time of his crime would no longer be sentenced to life because they would be considered a kid. America would be under binding legal obligation to massively increase its federal spending because it states in this treaty the nation cannot spend more on defense than on child welfare. And then finally, the child's right to be heard would allow him or her to seek governmental review of every parental decision in which the child disagreed with.
That's incredible. Like in China.
How would we fight a war on drugs?
So guys, here's the point to this. This is a treaty. This is not a law, which means if our corrupt government signs this thing this year, it's supposed to be up later this year, if they sign it, it's actually going to have abilities higher than a law. It's a treaty, meaning your state cannot opt out of it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Meaning this would be binding all the way across border to border.
Who makes the decision whether or not to sign it?
That would be our Congress, our Senate, and our President.
Oh, great. We're in great hands.
It's going to go.
Yeah, we are. We are in really good hands. Another couple of examples. You got pledge cards that are given to kindergartners, asking them to pledge that they will not basically look down on homosexuality. Now, guys, I don't know about you, but when I was in kindergarten, I don't think I knew what it was. I certainly didn't know what LGBT stood for.
What does that mean?
Transsexual.
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. That's the acronym.
What did he call it?
Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender.
I thought it was a gang or something.
Might as well be.
Oh my, the homo gang. Anyway, moving on.
Brad,
We've now got books like this one that says, "Are you a boy or a girl?" that is actually advocating homosexuality, bisexuality, and transgenderism. Notice this, guys. This book is written for kids ages 4 to 8.
It gives them a choice to be a boy or a girl. Is that what it is?
It's a quote. It's a sweet book about a gender different kid.
That's a different kind of sweet.
So is that book, Brad, telling them that they're like a gay because of a chemical birth, like a hormone thing, or I don't understand.
Yeah, basically it's saying if you feel feminine, it's all right to be feminine. Now, guys, let's go back to our list for just a second. I don't want you to lose sight of what I'm trying to communicate here. That's our list, right? That is what we base our ethics on. That is what we should be thinking about. And we look at what's going on in society and we realize, okay, we've got some things going on that obviously do not fall on the left side of this column. that we're using a different standard for what is right and wrong. Now, part of it is basically on our shoulders.
Yeah.
Because on the screen right now, what you're seeing is the top 100, actually you're seeing the top 11. These are the top 11 rentals from Netflix. Okay? I added the ratings because I was curious. I thought, well, what is it that we're watching as Americans? What is it that we are bringing into our home without anybody seeing us, without anybody knowing? You've got 5 that are rated R, 5 that are rated PG. So that should tell you something. Now let's break it down a little bit closer. There's a kids site or a site that will review movies for you called Kids in Mind. So I went on there. If you back up, look at the number 1 most rented movie on Netflix. It's called Crash. You go to Kids in Mind. You say, okay, Crash. What's the rating? How good is it? It gets a 6, 8, 10, meaning 6 in sex and nudity, 8 in violence and gore, and 10 in profanity. The next most rented movie by Americans in Netflix is a 7, 8, 10. Now, guys, you know, when you think about it for just a moment, 2 Chronicles 28, verse 19, the Lord brought Judah low because Ahaz, the king of Israel, for he had encouraged moral decline in Judah and been continually unfaithful to the Lord. You can't look at what morally we're doing in the United States of America right now and say that we're using God as our ethical standard. You just cannot physically do it. You know, one of the things that we're going to talk about when we talk about homosexuality or sexual ethics is the fact that they're putting these books into elementary schools. These are 2 of 8 that I'm aware of. And I will show you real quickly, we'll repeat this later on, but I'll show you very quickly a couple of pages from Daddy's Roommate, where the little boy says, my mommy and daddy got a divorce last year. Now there's somebody new in Daddy's house. Mommy says Daddy and Frank are gay. First I didn't know what that meant, so she explained it. Being gay is just one more kind of love. Love is the best kind of happiness. Daddy and his roommate are very happy together, and I'm happy too. Obviously, guys, hopefully you can see that we got some more decline going on. I've got some good news for you, or some bad news, depending on how you look at it. I am not feeling 100% today, so I'm actually going to let you guys out of class right now. Hope you all will use that time to do 2 things. Number 1, I do want you to read. I want you to read chapter 10 in the Geisler book. You will be tested on it. It's on biomedical issues. Sorry.
It's rated R.
And number 2, I want you guys to finish up your surveys and start writing your paper. Do not look at this as, woo-hoo, Brad's letting us out, we got free time. This will be some time you need to use wisely, reading that chapter and getting started on your paper if you haven't.
Hope you get feeling better.
Thank you, guys.
I have a question, Brad.
Sure.
I want some practical application here. I'm at the gym. This is a true story. I'm at the gym. 2 men, homosexuals, come in and work out together. How do you approach that? Or do you just, from Ezekiel, I'm supposed to say something to them, but how can you approach that?
Okay. When I would say, first and foremost, you got to remember you're supposed to give the truth in love.
For sure.
So if you come up to him and say, you're hellbound, I promise that probably will not work.
I would never do that. But
what I would do is I would try a much softer approach, and whether you try to, like, for instance, give him a Think magazine, or give him a tract to read, or ask him what he's doing this weekend, hey, would he mind coming to hear you speak, or something, to where you start a dialogue with this guy to where you can eventually get to that topic. Because, Quentin, here's the deal. Homosexuality is not the problem. The problem is he's lost. You save his soul, and then you fix the other problem with that.
That doesn't make sense.
Do what?
Save his soul, and then you talk to
Save his soul. Absolutely. You reach out to this guy, and you teach him the truth.
Oh, okay, I thought you meant, okay.
And in learning the truth, he realizes, oops, my lifestyle is not compatible. And the way I would do it personally, and the way I've actually communicated with some homosexuals is, I teach the concept that sin separates us from God. And so I'll list a whole bunch of them. I'll be like, what happens if I go out and steal? And they'll smile, well, you're separated from God. What happens if you do X? Well, you're separated from God. What happens if you live a homosexual lifestyle? And then they pause. And then they realize, and then they say, well, I guess you're separated from God. And you say, how does that make you feel? Do you think you need to make some changes in your life? Quentin, we're going to have an entire class that's going to deal with homosexuality and sexual ethics. So maybe that particular class is going to give you some material that you can use. I'm going to send you guys some material that will hopefully also provide you some answers on that. Hey guys, glad we at least got an hour in. I was going to cancel class altogether, but I felt like I wanted to at least get some stuff across.
You just had to see me, right, Brad?